Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and taking time out of your day to join us for this webinar. Today's webinar will be focused on organizational agility with SAFE, presented by Radtac. Just to let you know, today's call will be recorded and shared with everyone afterwards. Joining us today, our speakers will be Andrew Sales, who's a senior consultant at SBCT with Scaled Agile. And from Radtac, we have Glenn Smith, who's a consultant and trainer an SBCT candidate, as well as Suki King, who is also a consultant and trainer and also an SBCT candidate, and Kate Overend, who's also a consultant and trainer with Radtac. With that, I will go ahead and hand it off to Andrew Sales to get things kicked off.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And hopefully you can see my screen and hear me clearly. Let me just provide a bit of detail around the format we're going to use for the webinar today. I'm going to spend about 15 minutes just providing some context and setting the scene in terms of some of the challenges that organizations are addressing. And then we're going to ask each one of our panel of experts to provide some specific insights on how best to put this all into practice. So perhaps the best place to start is by taking a step back and having a look at the bigger picture and really asking ourselves the question, why are so many organizations currently undergoing transformations to change their ways of working? And ultimately, the goal that they have is to become a lean enterprise. And by that, we mean one that's able to thrive on digital disruption, be very responsive to change, and ultimately deliver value to their customers at the speed with which they demand. Now, one solution to these challenges is the Scaled Agile framework, and SAFE has emerged as the leading framework for enterprise agility, and it provides principles and practices based on Agile, Lean, and DevOps. And on this slide we're looking at here, you can see the SAFE big picture, which really acts as our visual guide to the framework, and behind each one of these icons there's an article with further information. But in addition to these principles and practices, SAFE also describes 5 core competencies of the lean enterprise. And these are shown on the slide here. And these really help organizations to understand the objectives when implementing SAFE. And of course, it starts with lean agile leadership. This is about leaders leading the change, empowering their teams to implement the new lean agile ways of working. We have team and technical agility. And this competency talks to the need to organize in cross-functional agile teams, and for those teams to embrace technical practices that are really focused on building in quality. And then DevOps and release on demand. This competency describes how we can use DevOps and a continuous delivery pipeline to ensure we can release whenever the business and our customers demand it. The business solutions and lean systems engineering competency is focused on how can we maintain some of these lean and agile ways of working, even when we're building some of the most complex systems in the world that often demand thousands of practitioners, likely include multiple suppliers. And then finally, lean portfolio management takes a lean approach to managing strategy and investment, portfolio operations, and lean governance. And we've seen that organizations that have applied SAFE have achieved some fantastic results, in particular those ones that have been able to implement the objectives laid out in the core competencies. And they're seeing some outstanding benefits in how they develop their technical products in terms of productivity, quality, and time to market. But the real question we're addressing today is whether that's enough to truly become a lean enterprise. And the answer to this question is that technical agility on its own is not enough. If we truly aspire to achieve enterprise levels of agility, we need to also consider how the whole organization is becoming adaptive and more responsive to change. In addition, because a lot of the work we do to develop new products and services often requires changes to the operational side of the business, if that part is not also applying lean and agile ways of working, we're at real danger of creating an organization moving at 2 different speeds. So we need to reframe our ambitions in terms of what we're calling organizational agility. And as you see on this slide here, organizational agility requires us to make significant changes to how we're organized, with a particular focus around organizing around value. We need to think about creating agile business teams that can deliver rapid adaptations of internal and external business processes. And we also need to think very carefully about how we're hiring, retaining, and developing people. We're going to have a very brief look at each of these topics now, and then, as I mentioned previously, we'll turn it over to our panel who can share their experience and guidance. So as we know, the foundation of Agile and also SAFE is the teams, and ideally these teams are cross-functional. They're teams of 6 plus or minus 3 people with the addition of a product owner and scrum master. And this team contains all the people required to define, to build, to test increments of value based on whatever the mission is of that particular team. And of course, in addition to continually delivering value, they also retrospect their processes on a regular basis as they strive to achieve a high level of performance. And I'm sure anyone on this webinar who's experienced working on a high-performing team would attest to the fact that it is an extremely fulfilling experience. Now, in the same way that Agile teams are cross-functional, SAFE extends this organizational construct to create cross-functional Agile release trains. And these are really best thought of as teams of teams optimized for the delivery of value. And while we know there's good reasons that organizations have evolved along these functional lines, for example, things like management efficiencies or specialization of skills, what we see is this traditional organization really impedes the flow of value. It creates a lot of handoffs that ultimately lead to a large amount of delays. So instead of this, the Agile release train is applying a systems thinking approach and really building a cross-functional organization that's optimized to facilitate flow all the way from ideation through to deployment. And when we start to view the organization from the point of view of value delivery, it's very often the case that Agile business teams, including functions such as HR, finance, marketing, purchasing, contracting, and many more, will play a critical role in the creation and delivery of this value. So for example, if we're delivering a new product to market, how can we do this successfully without sales and marketing? If we're attempting to optimize our supplier relationships, this isn't going to be possible without the support of legal and contracts. And in fact, when we start to view the world in terms of value creation and delivery, it becomes very hard to imagine a situation where the technical teams can ever be decoupled and work in isolation from the business teams. So with that said, how do we go about integrating Agile business teams? And in our experience, and what you can see on the slide here, is a 3-step maturity cycle really helps to describe and support this process. And we're going to have a look at each step in more detail now. So the first step is absolutely that the Agile business teams adopt and master Lean and Agile through things like the House of Lean and the Agile Manifesto. And even though we know the Agile Manifesto, for example, wasn't written specifically for them, it does form the root of all things Agile, and many of the principles are directly applicable to the work they do. The second reason why this is important is adoption of the Agile principles also creates a baseline for the business teams to interact with the development teams. And it creates a shared understanding about how the work is carried out. In terms of the practices that Agile business teams typically adopt, we very commonly see them adopt the role of product owner, providing some content guidance around the work they're doing, and the Scrum Master role helping to facilitate the process. And again, it's very common to see them implementing the recurring events as described by Scrum, the daily stand-ups, the iteration planning, the iteration reviews, and the retrospectives. And in addition, we see a lot of Agile business teams using visualization techniques such as creating Kanban boards to better manage the flow of their work. And that's one topic we'll dig into a little bit deeper very shortly in the webinar. Now, the second step is very important because over time, it becomes really crucial for these business teams to start to evolve and adapt their particular Lean and Agile ways of working. And not only does this make sure that the ways of working are better suited to how they want to work, but it starts to give them ownership. And we're starting to see a lot of examples of these emerge in the Agile community. And one good example, which you can see on the slide, is Agile Marketing. A lot of people are writing about and consulting on Agile Marketing. And of course, this makes a lot of sense since it's so tightly coupled to Agile development. And you can see here a specific set of principles related to Agile Marketing. And for example, we can see the first principle stressing the importance of validated learning in place of working software. Principle 3 talks specifically about applying the iterative process to marketing campaigns rather than software or product development. Now, if we were to stop there, then we may very well have efficient Agile teams, but they'd be working independently. In other words, they'd be focused on optimizing locally and improving their own processes, but potentially at the expense of the larger end-to-end systems view. And we know that SAFe takes a systems view. The Agile release train looks at all the steps needed to create and deliver value. So to address that, most Agile business teams need to be on the train. And how this works in practice is really going to depend on the scope and the nature of the work they're doing. If we return to our marketing example, a marketing team may very well be directly embedded in an Agile release train, or they could be operating as a separate train, delivering shared services across the organization via some coordinated backlogs and managing dependencies with other trains. So however we achieve this, the critical point is that we're creating a shared view of the work, a common way of speaking about the work, and of course a common cadence and synchronization that is critical to supporting product development and delivery. And the nice thing about what we see once this has happened is once we bring these business teams into the value stream, system integration and system demos really take on a much richer meaning. So new features now not only mean changes to code, but also updates to legal documents, changes to operation workflows, updates to other artifacts. Now, the final point I just want to make as an introduction before we pass over to our panelists is to address the needs of a contemporary workforce. We often have to focus on some changes to the traditional HR department. And in the white paper that you can see on this slide, Agile HR with SAFe, we describe 6 themes, which I'm going to briefly summarize here. Of course, the white paper is available to be downloaded. So the first theme, embracing the new talent contract, really recognizes the unique needs of knowledge workers. And it's all about providing engagement, empowerment, and the level of autonomy they require to reach their full potential. Fostering continuous engagement ensures that everyone in the enterprise understands the business mission, is engaged in meaningful work, and importantly, is fully empowered to do their part. And then hiring for attitude and cultural fit is about identifying people who will be most successful in the dynamic team environment that characterizes Agile cultures. The fourth theme, moving to iterative performance flow, describes the practices that we're seeing many organizations take already, who have eliminated the traditional annual performance review and put in place a more continuous informal feedback system. And then number 5, taking the issue of money off the table, this theme really addresses incentives. And in particular, we're looking at how we can tailor compensation and motivation to the differing needs of individuals in this next generation workforce. The final theme, supporting impactful learning and growth, really recognizes that modern careers are much more fueled by personal choice and meaningful growth rather than simply climbing a hierarchical ladder. So what I'd like to do now that I've just set the scene is hand over to our panelists and ask them some questions so we can dig into these topics in more detail. And during this time, if anyone on the webinar has any questions, please post these. And as we go, I'll do my best to raise them, or I'll make sure we have time at the end to cover a few of them. So perhaps the best place to start, continuing on that topic of HR, is with Glenn, who's joined us today to share some of his experiences specifically around this topic. And I know you and I, Glenn, have talked about Agile HR in quite some depth. Perhaps for the benefit of everyone on the webinar, you can start just by sharing some of your experiences in this area.
Yes, that's right, Andy. Thank you. I suppose whenever I think about Agile and HR, there's one particular organisation that I work with that springs to mind. And in this instance, we were working with some HR teams on both how they could improve their way of working, but also helping them work better with Agile delivery teams who are working on some new systems for them. So there was the two elements that we were supporting them. And what was great is that we saw huge benefits and tangible benefits from them doing both sides of that. But as you can imagine, and as we've talked before, having been through many transformations, HR is involved in pretty much all of them.
Okay, so thank you, Glenn. And one thing I heard you say in the first sentence there was that it sounded like there was two sides to the type of work you did. One part was getting the HR teams to apply agile ways of working. The other was about really adapting the processes that support the wider organization. Is that a fair description?
Indeed, yes. And if I go back to this particular instance, while our original driver working with these teams was structured around helping them understand how the IT delivery was going to be operating and how they were going to be interacting with them, we spent a lot of time helping them understand that way of working by applying agility into the HR operations. And it's interesting because when I've shared this story before with other people, particularly people who've been using Agile for a while, they sort of give you a surprising look, because actually what our colleagues in engineering who've been doing this agility for a while may think is pretty basic stuff, like the application of visualization and limiting a work in process. And working in a collaborative team structure, which is the basics, but it was massively powerful for them. And I think it's very easy for all of us when we're in the midst of have been using agility for a while to actually sometimes overlook the basics, and we shouldn't forget this. That echoes in what you've just been talking about in your presentation. If I just expand on the sorts of things that we were doing from an operations point of view, we were in essence using a hybrid model of Kanban and Scrum. In essence, Kanban board, daily stand-ups, bi-weekly planning and retrospectives. But because we were looking to ease the introduction in during what was a big change for the HR teams, but also a lot of other things that were going on in the organisation as well, we didn't institute a formal Scrum Master or Product Owner roles. The teams we were working with had been long-lived teams already. They were working well together. There wasn't any dysfunction there, and there were also a very similar level within the organisational structure, and actually operated and worked together very clearly on a day-to-day basis beforehand. But what we did find is that you'd often find that was a more senior person who sort of took a pseudo product owner role when it came to making the final call, if it was a case of do we do item A or item B. In my experience with them and in other organisations in HR and wider field as well, it's not uncommon to find someone who has a stronger interest in the new ways of working and the process of that. And you sort of find that they can often end up becoming Scrum Master-like in the way they do, because they're trying to help keep the team honest with the new ways of working, etc. As part of this process, we didn't actually create sort of formal user stories in the format we would expect in IT teams as a user. I want so that, etc. Because at that point, again, it was limiting how much change they were doing while introducing these new ways of working. But we did get them to think about, in essence, acceptance criteria. And we know that that's really important, because it helps us define the scope and implicitly what is out of scope as well. But it answers one really important question: is when will this thing be done? And when we know to stop. And I think that's really important when we're doing anything that's sort of knowledge work, because we can always continue, and the work that we do is unbounded by its nature. If I also, in the same organisation, but with some other teams in HR, with a larger piece of work, we were helping them think about how they could redesign their recruitment through to the onboarding process. And here we use tools again that agile teams would probably know, and we used a target user journey modeling activity. Here we started off with thinking about who are the different personas that would be going through that, and how would the different types of recruit interact differently, and then helped them work through and visualize the agreed workflow that they wanted to offer those different personas. And these personas really did help them, because as the experience, as they were going through the process, the demand that the different personas and recruits of the organization were going through, and the experience the organization wanted to give to those recruits, was going to vary dramatically. And as you can imagine, Andy, the process of onboarding and hiring an intern is going to be very different to that of doing so with a senior manager who you might have acquired through some headhunting activity. And if I link it back to some of the stuff that we talk about when we're doing SAFE, is actually that user journey map that we've created is an operational value stream that the HR teams were actually delivering.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Glenn. And you just started to touch on at the end there, adapting some of their processes. You started to mention recruitment. Maybe we could go to that second point now. What other internal processes did the HR department really have to start to rethink in order to support this goal of organizational agility?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose there's three things that sort of spring to my mind initially. And you talked about the white paper where there's a wide thing, but these things sort of come to my mind initially. Is that one of the first things is helping the organization move to a team lens from a focus on individuals, which is laced through often pretty much everything that the policies of the operation of running the people in an organization. Updating the job descriptions and looking at the incentive schemes. Now, let me just touch on those, expand on those three things for you. If we look at the sort of moving to team objectives, we know traditionally organizations have been very individually focused. Now, when you're going through transformations, whether it's actively trying to have HR to be more agile itself, or even just supporting the agility that other parts of the business are doing, actually it can be the intent to change to that more team orientated approach can be very quick to emerge, to work on. But actually, if you think about it, especially as we're doing things in a scaled environment, in large enterprises that are by their very nature often global in their organization, with a global labor market and the variety of rules that implies, the actual implementation of that can be quite difficult to apply, and it's quite time consuming. And so as an interim step, I often encourage managers through the HR teams to collaborate and assign a common goal to those individuals in the team, or release train as is appropriate. And then say, okay, well, we are going to provide everyone with the same objective in a performance management, and then agree that actually when we assign how well people have performed at their appraisals and things like that, we have a score for that objective which is applied uniformly across all those people. And I think this is important because we need to start demonstrating that we want a team to live and die by the same sword. Either the team is going to succeed or the team is going to fail. What we don't want is what you might have seen in the past of any in a particular role or person being blamed for why things weren't done, because we know we want it for that collaboration. If I move on to the job descriptions, it's not uncommon to find a whole range of dysfunctions within how they're currently written and implemented. They often encourage the siloed, sub-optimized ways of working that we're actually trying to break people out of, and can sometimes limit what people actually do in their role. And therefore, we need to help the HR teams identify this and start to remove these shackles to allow the collaboration and the T-shaped people that we know we need and want to do that. So I've helped organizations and HR professionals think about how this, first of all, isn't fit for purpose and where the challenges are, and then think about how do we structure new job descriptions and think about it through that team lens as well. But also then think about, well, also how do we articulate how through the progression of the role that they're in, they are performing. And then if I move to my last point about sort of incentive programs, there's a story I like to tell where there was one organization with some HR colleagues where I'd run a workshop and we were discussing some of the topics in Dan Pink's book, Drive, which I'm sure many people have read. But the book talks about some of the counterintuitive ways that we as human beings are motivated, and actually how things like the traditional high pay innovation bonus type process schemes and policies we have in place just don't work as we intended, and actually can be work against us to do those things. So we had a very useful conversation talking about these concepts and how things need to be different. And then the following day, I noticed the same group of people heading off for a meeting to talk about individual bonuses. And you may think at the time, well, it's easy to get frustrated and think, well, obviously they haven't engaged with that content enough to sort of understand it. But we know that knowledge isn't understanding. And we know that change doesn't happen overnight. And HR colleagues and professionals are no different from anyone else. And therefore, it's important that when we're working with HR, like anyone else for that matter, we ask them to make a commitment to change and improve. And as a coach and as a consultant working in these organizations, this gives me the permission to call out to those people that when they're demonstrating those more traditional behaviors and are not embracing some of the new ones we're looking for them to do.
Great insights there, Glenn. Maybe just one question that's come in is, all these kind of changes that you talk about, when would you really recommend bringing HR into the picture in terms of making them part of the transformation? At what part of the journey do you include them?
Yeah, super question, Andy. I mean, ideally, clearly, absolutely at the beginning. But that's not always possible, and depending on how the transformation was structured and the buy-in that it's had in an organization. So in essence, as soon as possible, so soon thereafter. This actually has a couple of benefits. If we think about it, some of the changes that we need to make, as I've already alluded to, can be a long time in coming, and therefore the sooner we start, the sooner we can get to the destination and have those things in place. But secondly, if we think about it, HR teams are very familiar with supporting people through change. And if we're running a transformation, this is a change activity that we're undertaking. So actually they can help people through that process. And the change agents, whether it's someone who's like myself, who's external and coming in and working with an organization, or people who are doing that themselves, actually the HR teams can support them through that process, which for some people may not be a skill that they have themselves. So actually, for me, they're really useful allies to have, and therefore the sooner you get them on board, the better.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Glenn. I'm going to move the slide on to our second panelist now, Kay, who has spent time working in particular with finance departments as part of the transformations that she's been leading. And maybe Kay, again, could just start by giving us both a bit of a background in terms of your experience, but also highlight what are some of the critical changes needed in finance departments when we start to aspire to levels of organizational agility.
Sure, and hi everyone. Yes, so I've been working in an organisation fairly recently that are undergoing a kind of an enterprise-wide transformation to SAFe. And while we were launching a couple of the Agile release trains, it became quite quickly apparent that the traditional finance approach wasn't really working that well. So the organisation was thinking about funding budgets and funding projects and upfront kind of annual budgeting cycles. So there were two main changes at that organisation that we decided to make. And the first one was really to address that problem around project funding. So instead of funding the kind of set timeframes of projects, we changed to start funding the value streams instead. This was quite a big change because the traditional model that they were used to was funding a project and allocating people to that project. But when they started to try and think about aligning against SAFe and creating and releasing value through the Agile release trains, through that incremental planning and delivery model, that kind of old traditional way of thinking about project funding really didn't align. The second change was to start moving away from fixed annual budgets. So rather than coming into our year with a very kind of strict and defined plan for the year in funding allocations, we changed and started thinking about rolling wave budgets and planning with a rolling 12 to 18 month planning horizon. This change really allowed far more flexibility and responsiveness for the organisation to adapt to the changing market conditions, and this was really important because it was a fintech organisation, and there's a significant amount of change that's happening in that industry, and without that ability to pivot and respond to these changes, the organisation were really going to struggle to continue to be market leaders in that space.
One question's come in, which I'd like to bring up in a minute, which is specifically about that rolling wave budgeting process, but maybe we can attack these in the order that you mentioned them, Kay. So can you give us a bit more detail around what you mean by funding value streams and why this is the approach that you're recommending?
Sure. So there's three main benefits that we see when we think about funding value streams. So what we mean by that is that we fund a long-lived agile release train, or maybe a couple of agile release trains, and we enable them to deliver value on an incremental basis. So the first benefit really is it helps break that functional silo. So rather than thinking about pulling people from traditional silos of maybe testing or development or analysis, it starts forcing that break away from that mindset and creating that end-to-end delivery capability. So all the people that are needed to deliver that value come together on this virtual agile release train and are empowered to manage their backlog and take responsibility for their ability to deliver value early and often. It also starts driving some of that cultural shift. So by having this kind of alignment, we start driving that sense of shared responsibility and ownership across those different functional groups, rather than sometimes what we see is those blame cultures. So we think about value from an end-to-end capability rather than trying to move value across the functional silos. The second thing that we think about when we fund value streams is it promotes that practice really of continual prioritization. So rather than thinking our project is coming to an end, is this the highest value item? Should we continue, or should we look at other opportunities that are in our backlog to deliver that highest value item to the business? So if we fund value streams, then rather than going and asking for permission to extend, or we need to keep particular people or capabilities within our agile release train, it empowers that team to really think and constantly reevaluate the backlog to make sure that they're delivering and working on the most valuable item. And I think the third benefit really is around, it gives us a far more detailed look at the total cost of delivering that project. So when we fund at value streams, we're able to identify the full cost of the project delivery or the system delivery, because all of the capabilities that are needed to enable that value delivery, to plan, to develop, to operate, are part of that value stream. And as we know, we have a fixed cost for that value stream, or that program increment, if we want to go to a slightly shorter level of a time frame or granularity. What we can then understand is the metrics around the cost of running that service from an end-to-end capability, rather than thinking about how much does it cost us to build it, how much does it cost us to operate it. So it gives us that total product cost rather than that siloed thinking around development and operational cost.
Okay, so that really sort of describes, like you say, how do we get a predictable cost for the programs that are running? What about the other thing that you mentioned at the beginning? Can you tell us a little bit more about why rolling wave budgeting was something you also focused on?
Sure. So the organisation traditionally had looked at establishing the plan up front for the year. So budget and funding had been allocated on this plan that had been put forward by the various business stakeholders, by the product management organisation. Whether that was the right thing to do as we progressed through the year was really kind of lost in the fact that we'd already funded a set of projects. So by moving to a rolling wave budgeting process, the organisation was far easier to continually assess and adapt to the changing requirements, but still had that kind of overall cost in mind. By being able to incrementally deliver value as well, we were continually able to look at the backlog at the portfolio level, so our epics, and see what will give us most value to that organisation by using fresh cost of delay data. So as we progress through the year, maybe the conditions have changed, maybe something that we thought was a high priority item maybe isn't that higher priority as maybe conditions have changed within the organisation. So by being able to take the cost of delayed data that is current, being able to have that ability to flex within the year and reallocate funding as we need to, we were able to make informed trade-offs by thinking about opportunity to make money, either maybe increase operational efficiency or to reduce risk.
One question that's come in, Kay, just related to that is, and you talked a little bit about making adjustments, but how would it work for organizations where they have maybe public obligations to declare a yearly budget or a plan ahead of time? How would they go about kind of making adjustments throughout that year?
So I think the overall cost is still defined. So we still know our operating costs for that particular year. So whether it's 50 million, 10 million, whatever that number is, we still have control of that overall cost. So what we're really talking about is how do we adjust the delivery plan to deliver that highest value item. So enabling our value stream and prioritization process at our program level is one aspect, and then allowing that flexibility to adjust that allocation at the value stream level, so portfolio level investment, and taking that rolling wave approach enables us to reprioritize. So I think the key thing is that the funding is still very much in a controlled environment. We still know how much we're allocating to deliver within a particular portfolio. The key point is that how do we think about prioritizing those items either at our portfolio or at epic level, or at that lower maybe feature level to deliver products and services within the set value stream.
Thank you, Kay. Another question has just come in from Anthony, and he says that it's notoriously difficult to try and put some of these changes in place. So maybe just as a way of wrapping things up here, could you tell us about any sort of challenges that you came across as you went about this? And then what would your recommendations be to approach some of these changes that you've been talking about, given some of the difficulty that Anthony's mentioned?
Sure. I mean, yes, I agree. It's not easy. And I think it's fair to say that generally speaking, none of the transformation activities are too easy. So the experience I had was that we had a lot of control within the organization, that or the concern rather that it was a lack of control. So if we removed this kind of project-based funding, we were losing our ability to control that, and we would lose knowledge about what the teams are working on at any point in time. What I actually found was that in practice, when we started working in this way, then the additional reporting and the metrics that were coming from the teams and from the Agile release trains actually allayed a lot of these fears, because they found that they had far more visibility into the work that was being planned and the outcomes of that work. So through the inspect and adapts and the demos, they could see value delivery far more clearly than they previously had when we were taking more of a project and an upfront costing approach. So actually the practice itself really matured, and that initial fear of that lack of control and that lack of visibility, we quite quickly proved to be incorrect. In terms of how to approach it, as we said, none of this stuff is easy. But I think most of us can agree, if we've led transformations in organisations, is that what we try and kind of really stick to is to take an agile approach to an agile transformation. So we run transformation teams potentially as agile teams. So we think about, what can we achieve over the next sprint? What can we achieve over the next increment? So that's the type of thing that we did at the last organisation I was at. So we took a very agile approach to making these changes within the finance function at the organisation. So we started by taking that small slice, and for the organisation I was at where we did this, we did it at a train by train level. So we ran some experiments, we learned what worked, what didn't work, and what did we need to make the process better. So we did part of the inspect and adapt was how do we think the changing to our finances either helping us or impeding us in delivering that value. And I think it's really a valuable approach to take, because we're not trying to bore the ocean straight away, but we have got that that slice across the organisation. We prove the benefits, we prove that we've still got enough control in our context, but it's increasing our visibility and it's enabling us to pivot far more effectively than if we had these kind of fixed upfront costs or these project costs too far defined.
Perfect. Thank you, Kay. So I'm going to move on now to the last of our panelists. And I think one critical element of many of the organizations, or many organizations are facing when they undergo changes to ways of working, is the need to consider a wide range of compliance concerns. And this is the topic that Suki's going to talk about. And maybe, Suki, we could start just by being very clear for everyone on the webinar what you mean by compliance and why, in your view, it's so important to involve them in a lean agile transformation.
Hi, everyone. So by compliance, we're talking about those colleagues in the wider business who are trying to ensure that the products, the services, the systems that we are building adhere to, whether it's government regulation, it might be financial regulation. I'm currently working with a couple of hardware companies who make medical devices, and they have compliance, their regulations they must adhere to from the various medical bodies, the FDA or the equivalents across Europe. So by compliance, it's those parts of the business who really want to ensure that those standards are being met. And what traditionally happens is, in our traditional ways of working, we have had teams who are doing great work, but then that work gets rejected because they've not fulfilled some requirement or some obligation, which the issue is they've not always been aware of that. Yeah, the teams aren't always aware of all the hurdles that they have to jump over in order to have that work accepted. So, whilst we are talking about compliance, the same applies to other parts of other departments, such as security as well. And you could see this as being rather unflattering, but you could describe the compliance, security, and the others as kind of like gatekeepers. And if you don't meet their requirements, then the work that you've done is simply going to get rejected. So ultimately, whether it's security, compliance, change management, change advisory boards, we do need to integrate them into the process. And the truth is that, they themselves need to change how they work. And we have to encourage that and coach them through any transformation. And from my own experience, they actually do value the increased transparency and the awareness that they get. And what we're trying to avoid is, as I said at the start, teams having to do rework because we know that rework leads to delays, and ultimately that leads to increased time to market, which is not what we want.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of how critical they are to the value stream and really creating and delivering the value, like you said. So maybe just around some specifics now, what are some of the changes that you yourself have been focusing on when you're working with these teams?
So the first thing I would say is get them involved early. And this does require encouragement, particularly if you're just starting out on your transition to lean agile ways of working. I think an absolutely fundamental step is to ensure that there is collaboration at the program Kanban. So having compliance, security, and others having them helping to refine those features. And quite a crucial point is having them add acceptance criteria from their own point of view, from their area of concern. So get them involved at the program Kanban, get them involved early, prior to the teams then taking that work into the PI through the PI planning process. Compliance, security, and others, they can also be really helpful when teams are reviewing and updating their definitions of done as well. And this, once again, it just ensures that when the teams perform work, they have full knowledge of all the hurdles, effectively, for want of a better word, all the hurdles that they must jump over to have that work accepted at the end of the process.
One question that's just come in, Suki, that you can maybe pick up at this point is, how do they fit into that bigger picture? Are they a team on an Agile release train? Are they normally operating as a shared service outside of the Agile release trains? What's your experience been there?
So I've actually seen both scenarios. I was involved in an art launch in a UK government agency. And there, as you can imagine, there was a lot of compliance and regulatory obligations. So in that particular scenario, we had a dedicated compliance team who were actually part of the Agile release train. However, in other organizations, compliance tends to be more of a shared service. So the Agile release train is one particular area of concern for them and the work that the art is delivering, but they are outside of the art and they have other areas of concern elsewhere in the organization.
Okay. Have you seen one work better than the other, or is it just really dependent on the particular situation?
I think it's more the latter. It does really depend on the situation. And, it's one of those things that, I think can come out of and inspect and adapt as well. For example, if you have a lot of compliance related activity and perhaps getting time with those colleagues, if there are delays in having those conversations and getting those clarifications, then one potential improvement that an organization might consider, or an art might consider, is, does it make sense to actually have some dedicated compliance officers within the art? So yeah, these are things that we can inspect and adapt to improve.
Okay. What about the question that I asked Kay, thinking about how some of the things you're mentioning really contrast with the ways that compliance departments work currently, particularly in terms of the mindset. Again, what are some of the challenges that you've been up against, and what are some of the recommendations for supporting on this journey?
So I think the biggest challenge, I would say, is it does require a mindset shift. Yeah. So getting these colleagues from the wider business on board early is crucial, and I think that's a common theme with some of what Glenn and Kay have said as well. And that's not going to happen by itself. Some of these colleagues in the wider business, they've spent years, if not decades, working in a certain way. So we do need to help bring them along the journey. And one way that can happen is actually trying to get them onto training. For example, leading safe is very appropriate for these colleagues in the wider business, and a number of compliance officers, security officers who have attended leading safe, they've told me, in terms of the feedback, they say essentially, oh, I get it now. I get what you're trying to do, and I know how I can interact with you, and I know how I can support you guys in a much better way. And, look, it can be a challenge to convince them to engage with the transformation. But by training them, I really do think they start to understand the principles, and therefore, the practices make sense as well. And we just can't expect them to align to us without having some form of training. But, as I said before, in my conversations with compliance or security, they do tell me that they gain a lot of value from having greater awareness of what is currently being worked on and what is planned to be worked on next.
Thanks, Suki. I think one of the things we see is that a lot of the, like we discussed earlier, a lot of the bodies of knowledge talk specifically to software or product development. What sources of knowledge or what additional artifacts are you pointing the compliance teams to if they want to learn a bit more about this?
So a couple of, I'm just going to name a couple because I appreciate when leave some time for any additional questions. First thing I would say, one of the best books I've read in the last couple of years, I'm not on commission, but is the DevOps Handbook. And the DevOps Handbook also, which is by Gene Kim and Patrick Dubois, Jez Humble, John Willis, some of the original founders of DevOps, they have a section there on how to integrate compliance, security, change advisory boards, etc., into the process. So some good tips in the DevOps Handbook. And the other one I will mention is actually on the SAFE website itself. So if you look at the full solution, full SAFE, or if you look at large solution, you will see the compliance article. And behind that compliance article, there's a really, really good white paper based on organizations' experiences on how to meet Sarbanes-Oxley, MiFID, whatever it might be, even though they're working in a lean, agile way. So that's, if you certainly don't want to read that book, if you've got other books to read, that compliance white paper on the SAFE website is a great resource.
Thanks, Suki. And as you mentioned, let's try and get a few more questions in before we hand it over to Glenn to wrap things up. Question here, perhaps I can come to you first, Glenn, which is a question here about when we're hiring. In your opinion, what's more important, to hire for technical skills or to hire for attitude?
Yeah, that's a good question. Attitude every day of the week. I'm a firm believer that we can train technical skills relatively easy, and I say relatively easy, mindful that some of them aren't learned overnight. But the reality is, if you're hiring someone who's not very engaged or isn't wanting to play nicely with others, or is just a bit of a jerk, these things that you're going to struggle to fix in a timely manner and in a cost-effective way as well. So, those behaviours, things that we used to call the soft skills, which are now so important. I'm not sure I would call them soft skills anymore.
Thank you, Glenn. Suki, maybe we can jump back to you. One of the things you mentioned in one of your answers, I think, was the definition of done. The question is, can you tell us a bit more about the definition of done, and particularly how this works at scale?
Sure. So the definition of done is a common understanding from all. So a definition of done appears at different levels. Obviously, you have a team definition of done, where that's a common understanding of what we mean by when we say this story is done. Common understanding, so there's no ambiguity. And definitions of done appear at different levels. So we may have a system level definition of done, or a release level definition of done, perhaps also one at solution level if you're in a solution train. And the definition of done is a great way to bake in a lot of those quality practices. One of our core values is built-in quality, and the definition of done could be is often a really good way we can ensure those quality practices are being adhered to. And one of the common questions I get coming up when I'm delivering training classes or coaching is, what is the difference between the acceptance criteria and the definition of done? One way to look at it is, if you're always putting the same acceptance criteria against each feature or against each story, then that could well be a good candidate to just actually go into the definition of done instead.
Okay, and then just to be clear, Suki, I think you mentioned this as a suggestion of where compliance could start to put some of their particular policies. Is that right?
Yeah. So the definition of done for a team, or indeed at other levels, could be a place where compliance-related activity, compliance-related obligations are made transparent and they're visible to all. But you will still always get a particular piece of work. You are working on a particular feature or a story, which might have something specific, which is in addition to what's already in your definition of done.
Got it. Thank you. Maybe a couple of questions I can just pick up. One was, is Scaled Agile planning to have certifications around agility in HR and marketing? Nothing planned at the moment. And the second one was to say a bit more around Principle 4 of the Marketing Manifesto, which was the one around customer discovery over static prediction. And really what that principle is trying to say is that even if we have models or good descriptions of our customers, personas, for example, we always work on the assumption that customers are not necessarily predictable. Their tastes are going to change over time. So we need to commit ourselves to consistently going out to meet them face to face and understand their needs, rather than assuming that our assumptions will hold for indefinite periods of time. Maybe just one more question that I could send your way, Kay, is you talked about the rolling wave budgeting. Is there a frequency or a cadence that you've seen work particularly well? Are these budgets being adjusted every 3 months, 6 months? What is it that you're generally seeing work well?
I think, so in my experience, it was an every 3 month type exercise. So we would be able to adjust the funding and the budgeting, given that feedback we were seeing every 3 months. But that's in an environment where there's a significant amount of change. So it might be maybe in some more, less or some more stable environments that type of frequency isn't required. As I said, this was a fintech payments company, and they had a significant amount of competition in that space to need to compete with. So because of that amount of change, they decided that every 3 months was a horizon that worked well for them.
Perfect. Thank you, Kate. So now what I'm going to do is hand it over to Glenn, who's going to say a few things about how Radtac can best support organizations on this journey, share some of the upcoming events, and then close out the webinar. So over to you, Glenn.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Suki and Kay, for joining us today, and everyone else who's on the call. Yeah, absolutely. Radtac is a agile transformation company. We've been around since the 90s. We have some different pillars that we work around, our training and education, both our public courses and on-site, plus consultancy and coaching, so actually helping organizations go through some change. And finally, team and practitioners, so actually providing people and helping organizations hire these people in as well. While we're a UK headquartered company, we have offices around the world, and we serve obviously a global market, as you can imagine. I guess if we look from a SAFE point of view, actually, we've been a gold partner with Scaled Agile since 2016, and we have a very strong relationship. We are regularly talking at the summits. We have various members of our organisation has actually contributed towards the SAFE framework as well. As Kay talked about, as an organisation, if we're helping organisations be agile, then we are agile in the way that we work as well, and how we also deliver that with our customers. So I think and that long pedigree of working in a safe environment has meant that as one of the first gold partners in the UK, particularly, we have lots of experience in doing that as well. Just to let you guys know, we've got some SAFE training events coming up from across implementing SAFE, leading SAFE, etc., across the world. You can find all these available on our website, radtac.com, plus a whole of other agile training as well. We can also deliver the whole gamut of SAFE training in a private context as well. And if that's something that you're interested in, again, either reach out to us from radtac.com or reach out to one of the speakers today. Other than that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance today and their questions. I hope you found this valuable, and we will circulate the recording of this to those who are not able to attend later, very shortly. And last but not least, thank you very much for Andy from Scaled Agile to give us a presentation on that view, and for Jeff as well for hosting at the top of the hour and making sure all the technical stuff is working as planned. With that, I'll close out the call and wish everyone they enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.